Ron Marchetti and I had a wonderful time going around Bloomfield, taking photographs of the houses, the antique houses here in our town. And Ron will be the first to tell you that this is just the tip of the iceberg in a town that has many beautiful homes. So it's my pleasure to thank Ron for his time and energy in this program. It takes more hours than you would imagine. And thank you for doing this for us today. Welcome.
Thank you, Ruth Ann. Thank you, Allison. It is a pleasure, and I am delighted to welcome all of you. And I'm hoping that this will end up being something that somewhat informative and somewhat entertaining. We in Bloomfield are blessed with just an amazing collection of houses that have survived for more than 200 years, 250 years, and more so than survived, they've actually flourished. They've stayed current with the time, so that when they were built, they served the purpose which the family needed. And as time has passed and technology has changed, they've been able to adapt the various novelties that have grown to the point where these antique structures can accommodate life in 2023 in a completely compatible way. So it's really it's a very special town, and in it, a part of what makes it special is this connection to our antique roots. Before I go any further, I want to make sure to acknowledge all the people who've made such a difference to allow us to put a program like this together. Allison Wilkos, of course, for her work as a liaison and tech support. I have to be completely honest. I have no idea what I'm doing with a Zoom presentation, and were it not for Allison, this could never have happened. And anything that looks remotely polished is as a result of her ability to tweak the things that come up on the screen. In terms of research and documentation, in the Wintonbury Historical Society, Ralph and Louise Schmoll, who have been very active in producing videos and mounting displays in the Fanny Gabriel History Center at the Historical Society, have an exhibit now that is on display at the Historical Center, and it is an old house exhibit, and all of the oldest houses in town are represented there, and they'll show up in slides in this presentation as well. You're certainly welcome to go and see that exhibit. It's, of course, free. Janice Langston and Diana Barnard have been instrumental in their deep research, their knowledge of genealogy, their ability to discover and interpret original sources. It's a terrific resource to rely on. In the process of making this video, Ruth Ann and I encountered welcoming opportunities from Don and Janet Baker, Gail Ferris and Frank Grillo, Charlie McComb, to have greater access to see interiors of the house, or more history about the development and expansion of the various houses. And of course, very special thanks to Ruth Ann. I have no artistic eye, so virtually all of the photos here, which are beautiful as well as informative, are hers. I appreciate all of her advice with the design, the layout, and most important of all, the moral support to try to explain some little bit about Bloomfield's past. So in terms of what we want to cover, I want to talk very briefly about the origin of the Wintonbury Parish. It'll be a reminder for most of you. You already know the information. Talk a little bit about why here. We'll go over architectural style as time goes by. And for the most part, the timeline of structures presented here will be from 1650 to 1755, and a couple of other later examples for comparison. So talking about the origin of Wintonbury Parish, when Windsor was founded in 1633, it was typical of a New England community. The community was based around the religious organization, which today is the Congregational Church. And it was expected of all parishioners that they would attend a meeting every Sunday. And you didn't get excused from doing this for almost any reason. So regardless of the weather or the distance that you traveled, you went to meeting. And in 1734, Windsor had been around for 100 years, Simsbury and Farmington almost 100 years as well. And the agrarian society that supported their existence required quite a bit of land in order to at a minimum survive or hopefully prosper. And so 100 or 150 acres was not an extraordinary size for a farm. And after 100 years, most of the area adjacent to the meeting house and the town center in the three towns had been taken, and people started to expand away from the town center. In the mid 1600s, the Messenger family came west. It's hard to imagine that this was thought of as going west. The Messenger family went west to a site that is now on the corner of Cottage Grove Road and Blue Hills Avenue, and located here. And that started a general trend. In 1734, there were 27 families from Windsor, 12 from Simsbury, and 8 from Farmington, who by 1736 signed a petition to gain what they called winter privileges, so that they could go to meeting here, much closer to where they lived, rather than traveling 6 miles to Bloomfield or 6 miles to Simsbury and even farther to Farmington. This was granted, and hence the Wintonbury Parish came to be. The Win from Windsor in Wintonbury, the Ton from Farmington in Wintonbury, and the Bury from Simsbury in Wintonbury. And then we hear about Tunx's trails. So one might ask, why settle here? One answer is that it's a location of a travel crossroads. You could go north to Granville, Mass, and south to Hartford. You could go east to Windsor and the Connecticut River, west to Simsbury, where you then could go north with easy access to Westfield and easy access to Farmington and New Haven. New Haven being an important place because it was Connecticut's deep water port, and also because in colonial times, the legislature split between meeting half the year in New Haven and half the year in Hartford. So parishioners wanted to be able to be represented, and they had to gain access to those places. Further advantages, we have more than 20 square miles of unsettled land that was suitable for agrarian purposes. Originally, there was a lot of activity in timber, the production of pitch and turpentine, which fell into the triangle trade, and therefore we ended up with molasses from the Caribbean, and that was turned into rum at Rum Springs in North Bloomfield. Dairy was the most common farming activity. Later, tobacco was planted in the northeast section of town, never with the same abundance as we find in Windsor and Suffield and even in Simsbury, but it was here, and the Gabbs had a tobacco factory or a cigar factory at the corner of Gabb Road and now Bloomfield Avenue. Also here we had modest water power, Washbrook and Tumblebrook for milling and sawing. So it was a good place to settle down, and Bloomfield has maintained an agrarian nature all the way up to World War II, where suburban development began to overtake the farming. We'll talk about architectural style as it appears in the upcoming slides. All of you will recognize these terms: a Cape Cod, a Saltbox, a center chimney colonial, center hall colonial. Each of these is a slightly different variation on construction, and all represent a slightly different way for a family to experience their time at home. So with that, we're going to move to our oldest house in Bloomfield, in Wintonbury. This is attributed to 1650, and it also illustrates what I alluded to earlier. These houses get to change to live in our modern era. What you're looking at here is located right by the banks of the Farmington River, where the Spoonville Bridge crossed over into Windsor. The original core of the house is reported to be log construction, very unusual in New England, even in colonial New England, to have log cabins. And clearly this dwelling has grown to meet the needs of the day. One interesting thing you might notice is the brick basement, which is at a, basically what they would call today a walkout level. In all likelihood, this would have been some sort of storefront or shop front or workshop in the day. But this is our oldest documented house in 1650. So that's quite a few years before Wintonbury Parish, and it would have been a true outpost from either Windsor or Simsbury. Some of you may have driven by this house and not remarked it, but at 1729, again, before Wintonbury Parish, this was our first brick dwelling that we know of that has survived, and it has gone through 3 iterations. It started as a 1.5-story dwelling. So this part, the first floor, would have been the original structure, and it probably would have had a pitched gable roof, and we would have called it a Cape Cod. Cape Cod is a term that came in the late 1600s because so many dwellings were 1.5 stories, and they existed in all places on Cape Cod. And that term has survived to become quite modern. I mean, they still build Cape Cod 1.5 story houses, a full story first floor, and a fairly steeply pitched gable with enough room in what would have been an attic to make for a living space. So they call it a 1.5 stories. Now this house, and we don't have the exact dates on it, was turned from a cape or a 1-story into a 3-story house. So it was actually at one point this tall, up where my cursor is, and that was then deconstructed to its current state with a dormer in the attic. So it went from a 1-story to a 3-family 3-story house, returned to a 1-family house with a full second story. And what I would point out of interest is notice that over these symmetrical arrangements of windows and doors, that the lintels are what they call a flat arch. It sounds like an oxymoron because we think of arches as curved, but this supports the weight of the opening of the window and door. And then look what they did when they changed the house. They went to a shallow arch, and this is mirrored on the sides of the door of the house as well. It's a much later design, more of a Roman kind of element. In this structure in 1730, so it's just about the same time, Major James Goodwin constructed what was originally a Saltbox structure. This house was enlarged in 1917 and 1955. It's located right below the summit of the Metacomet Ridge on the border of Bloomfield and Simsbury today. It's inaccessible to the public. It's on a private road. We talk about a Saltbox house, and I have an illustration here that I think you'll find helpful. So this would be the front of the house, and it would have two full stories with a pitched roof. To add another full room on the first floor, to add another full room on the first floor, they simply extended the roof line to meet the ceiling of the extension. Now, in this case, and quite typically, the roof pitch does not follow one straight plane. It does tend to break in order to allow for a bigger room here. Sometimes it is a one pitch structure, and this is what they call a Saltbox. This chimney illustration here, you can see on the dotted lines, show you that to expand the house from its one room deep design to two rooms on the first floor, the chimney could be extended, and you end up with a floor plan that looks pretty much like this. This is a typical Saltbox or lean-to addition. This actually is the plan of the Whitman House in Farmington. Some of you may know it. And what it shows is a center entrance with a winder staircase. By winder, I mean it simply doesn't have any landings. It just simply winds its way around to get to the second floor. Sometimes these foyers are just a little bit larger, and so the stairs will ascend in three pitches. It'll go up 3 or 4 steps, take a right turn and go up 7 or 8 steps, take another right turn and go up 3 or 4 more steps and come up on the second floor landing. This is to allow for a chimney in the center. And in this typical illustration, you see a big fireplace in the parlor, the hall, and even generally an even bigger fireplace in the lean-to addition. This then is often known as a keeping room. This is where a lot of the household tasks would take place, and based around this big hearth with all the cooking. And remember that they had a fire 365 days a year to cook. So it was a pretty important addition to the house. This is called, incidentally, a parlor and a hall because technically this was slightly more formal, might include much more domestic activity, and in the earliest times might often house a bedstead for grandparents or elderly or infirm, because many generations lived in the same house. And the Goodwin Tavern, Ruthann is kibitzing, and she wonders about the Goodwin Tavern. It's coming up. It's a little bit later, going chronologically, and so also in 1730. This is on Tunxus Avenue. It's the Samuel Brown House. Very similar in its fenestration. This is a very common symmetrical design, 2 windows, a door, and 2 windows all arranged above each other with a chimney in the center. So that floor plan works so much for this as it did for a Saltbox house, except this has a full 2 stories on the second floor. The second floor does not have a lean-to or a shed. Samuel Brown, we know that SB is carved in one of the beams in the attic, and he married Mary Phelps of Windsor. So in 1730, and this is slightly before Wintonbury Parish, we're still connected quite directly to Windsor. Also, public schooling was not mandated until almost the end of the 18th century. So it was up to each town to provide a school access, and there were usually several small buildings scattered about town. This was located, the Brown House was located across the road from the North Middle District School, and frequently teachers who were appointed only for 1 year at a time would board at the Brown House as well. So that's a long time ago. And looking almost exactly the same, a little bit farther north, is a house built by a grandson of William Phelps, and we know Mary Phelps from the previous slide, and their houses look awfully similar. This one is not just a center chimney colonial design. The chimney, of course, comes out at the center of the roof, but it has a remarkable chimney base that measures 9 feet by 12 feet in the basement. And if you think of that, that encompasses enough space to be a small bedroom. But it's that important to have heat sources to survive the mini ice age that Connecticut was experiencing in the early 1700s. Beautiful house here. And this finally is the Goodwin Tavern. And I'm showing you a picture from the historical archives. This house, unfortunately, a few months ago, due to an accidental fire in the process of its being renovated, was almost completely destroyed. We're not sure of whether any of it can be saved. So this was the Goodwin Tavern, 1746. It's a center chimney design. Notice in the front facade, this facade is symmetrical, but it's only 3 openings instead of 5. Both were common. But look at the roof on this one. This is what's called a gambrel style. And a gambrel style, instead of having a straight pitch running from the peak of the roof down to the top of the first floor, has 2 pitches, the first being rather shallow and the second a bit steeper. This allows for almost a full height attic, which a pitched roof would not do, or at least not as accommodatingly. And a second advantage beyond the additional space is that the timbers used to frame this construction don't have to be as robust or as long as those for a full pitched roof. Now, this is particularly exciting because you can see that it is not just a gambrel, but a gambrel saltbox. And so you see this barely breaks the line of the pitch, but it is clearly a lean-to addition. This part here is the full height first floor. This part here is the lean-to in the attic, and the size of the window lighting that loft space is indicative of what the space might have been like.
Another 15-foot.
It's and yes, and this is another one. This has a chimney base that is 15 feet square in the basement. And that's the size of a decent bedroom in a modern house. And I want to go back just very quickly. When we look at this lean-to addition, and I spoke of the staircase, note that the staircase only allowed access to the parlor and the hall, from the parlor and hall to the two chambers above it. And if one wanted to access the lean-to, well, privacy is sacrificed. There's no way to get to the lean-to in this configuration on the second floor without going through one of the bedrooms. So frequently, there would be another small and very steep staircase in one of these corners, perhaps here or perhaps here. And we know in the 1740 edition of the Joseph Loomis House in Windsor that they have exactly that configuration. Right in this corner on the first floor is a very steep closed-in staircase that allows for discrete access to the lean-to. And the Sanford House in Bloomfield, which is a full two-story house, has that same arrangement so that the bedrooms in front do not have to be transited in order to get to the bedrooms in the back. So I'm going to skip forward back now to move past the Goodwin House to another 17. This was Goodwin was 1749. This is listed as 1750, but there's some lore that suggests it might have been earlier. A member of the Cadwell family built it. This is a Cape style. I mentioned the Cape style earlier. Notice the symmetrical 2 windows, door, 2 windows, and a steep pitched roof. This allows for sleeping in what is basically an attic space. You really can only stand up right at the center of the ridge, and the rest is not really meant for commodious living. It's primarily for sleeping accommodation. And in fact, in the winter, it might even be cold enough that people all moved downstairs and slept down there. This is one of the early plans for a Cape Cod design. I find this plan a little unusual. What it shows is a straight run staircase with 2 fireplaces on the first floor that meet in the attic, joining with the keeping room fireplace and extending through the roof as a center chimney. A lot of times, this foyer space is simply not large enough to accommodate the stairway. And so the foyer has no stairs at all. The chimney is massed more compactly, and there's a stairway on one or the other side. In the keeping room, they're illustrating 4 small chambers that may or may not be typical. It certainly is a possibility in many of these houses. These 2 chambers farthest from the fireplace would have been pantry and cold room, and one of these would have been in vernacular terms called a bourning room, and another might be for an elderly couple or relative. And primarily the bedroom is opposite the parlor. Privacy is at an absolute premium, and that's okay. When this house was built, people were living multi-generations under one roof. They all got up and worked together all day long. and they went to bed when it was dark. It wasn't a highly social time. Social activities would have taken place through church activity and in a meeting house primarily. So depending on the finances and social status of the family, the Cape Cod would have been the least expensive and easiest structure to build. So here is in 1750, same age, another Cape Cod. This one is a little bit larger. You'll notice that the pitch of the roof extends quite high, and its novelty is that it has a brick walkout basement that was the kitchen, so that the kitchen was not in the keeping room by design. So this would have been an upgrade from the standard Cape, more sophisticated and more headroom up in the half story above. Note again, the steepness of the pitch allows for 2 windows in the gable, and above them, a tiny window here, which indicates an actual attic. So this probably would have been plastered and ceilinged apart from the pitch. Another 1750 house attributed to Charles Eno. This too is near the very first house we saw near the Farmington River. It's hard to know what exactly is the core of the house. It's got this addition. There's another addition you can't see. Here's the third L. What we learn about this is, what we learn from this is that these houses are flexible. They're meant to grow and change with not just the needs of the family, but also the stylistic popularity of designs at any given time, and centuries of design change. This house is, we learned from the book, From Wintonbury to Bloomfield, which if you don't have that book, it's worth finding. You can get it at the Historical Society. It's an excellent book, wonderful resource. And we learned from it that its original walls were made of horizontally stacked 2x4-inch studs. And if you can imagine that, just laid one on top of the other for a very solid wall. Not at all typical. It's not unheard of, but it's the only one we know of in Bloomfield. And this house has gone through, in its various iterations, an upgrade to what we call a Greek revival style. Notice this triangle in the pediment. It looks like a miniature version of a Greek temple. And these windows, which in vernacular are called the eyebrow windows, they're at the floor height in the attic or second floor for ventilation. So not very Greek at all, but a practicality that illustrates the ability of people to adapt and keep the houses relevant. You would need that ventilation in the summer. Another 1750 house. Who knows what was going on in 1750 in Bloomfield, but we've got a lot of them. This one is located on Wintonbury Avenue. You probably haven't seen it when you drive by because it's up and back from the road on a pathway that leads up the hill farther to the top of the ridge where the Lattimore Cemetery is located. In this illustration, we see these windows, which are being replaced with smaller windows. You can see that these had been the same size as this on the first floor. It's an unusual change. Not sure exactly why. One conjecture is that getting prefabricated windows to match these dimensions is hard to do, And so it's an economic decision to make it make the opening smaller, certainly easier to insulate and so on. But again, a typical center chimney 1750 house. Here's another 1750 house. This is known as the Prosser Inn. It wasn't built by Prosser or the Prosser family. It was built in 1750 by a member of the Cadwell family. But in 1823, James L. Prosser, who later became quite the philanthropist to the town, purchased the property in 1830, converted it to the Prosser Inn, and it was an inn because, in part, it was located on a stage route on Simsbury Road. The stagecoach ran from Westfield, Mass. To Hartford. Looking at this, you can see that this house also grew with time. Here's an L addition over here. Here's a lean-to addition over here. Here's another second L with 2 stories instead of 1, as we see here and here. And in this slide, we actually get to conjecture that at one point, this house had been a salt box. So if you follow the line of the clapboarding from this gable at the top of the second story, and you follow it down, that ends here. But look, the ridge, the pitch of the ridge extends quite a bit further, indicating that at some point or other, this was probably a lean-to addition that got raised to full height, and with another L added on behind it. So these houses grow in order to keep their relevance and utility. And in most cases, they're not additions that detract from the original design. They really look quite good. This house is also on Bloomfield Avenue. Speaking of 1750, another one, was built by the Reverend Hezekiah Bissell. He was the first Reverend in 1738 of the Wintonbury Parish. Came from Windsor, from a very famous family. This is the facade that faces the street. Notice what's missing: no center chimney. Probably was a center chimney when the house was originally built, but it was remodeled and expanded at least 3 times since 1750. And one of the things that changed was the removal of the center chimney to accommodate chimneys on the back wall of the main house. So notice, this probably would have been a salt box. And then the lean-to addition was replaced by a kitchen L that was a full 2 stories. And this chimney serves the flue for originally what would have been a keeping room, then a kitchen, and also the front parlor, the south parlor. And this 2-story addition, we believe, was a discrete 4-room house located probably nearby, that was either moved intact and attached to the main house, or was disassembled and reassembled to add 4 more rooms to the main house. So as I say, the house has grown over time, and that's pretty much what this slide is talking about. I do want to call attention to this door here called the coffin door. It's another vernacular. Most of these colonial houses had one. The lore being that if one enters the front door, you're confronted immediately with a staircase. If you're going to have a wake and you want the casket to enter the house and be in the parlor, you can't get it there through the front door without turning the casket on end and going through 2 more doors. So you had a coffin door, and you could therefore enter without disturbing the I can't really talk more because my time is really
Sure.
running. So I want to show you some examples of paneling. This is in the Bissell house. This is the carved paneling in the north parlor, would be the oldest paneling in the house. It's symmetrical, like most Georgian architecture. It's symmetrical, like the windows and door in all these houses that we've seen. This door, which I lost my cursor here. This door, which leads to a vestibule and outside, is balanced on this side by a window with carved shutters as well. And notice the symmetry of the paneling here, the two larger panels that flank the fireplace, and no mantle. This is what's called a bolection molding, was very common, and it was never intended to have a mantle. This is the paneling in the dining room, and you might recognize that I'm broadcasting from the paneling from this room in the dining room. It's much later. This would have been 1800s, and it would have been a retro detail, I call it, because it wants to look pretty much like this panel. It wants to look antique. One little trick of the eye here is that this fireplace looks like it's in the middle of the room, but it's not. You'll notice that there is more space between the wall and the fireplace here than there is between the fireplace and the wall there. These panels, these carved panels, you'll notice, are narrower than these. But it was thought that symmetry was so important that they tried to replicate that visually, and rather successfully. This is the fireplace in the south parlor, which is the biggest room in the house, and it's completely different in its sensibilities. Notice it has a mantle. Notice that it has pilasters. That is to say, it looks like pillars that are attached to the wall. Carved pilasters going from floor to ceiling, and carved spaces below the mantle, much more intricate, much more commonly Georgian, and indicative of the house going, quote unquote, upscale, as the fortunes of the owner allowed. Symmetry one more time. Notice that this is a china cupboard, and it's balanced on this side by a doorway. So it looks very much of a piece. And this is the front foyer. And this is an example of a 3-pitch rise. So you go up 4 stairs to a landing, and then you go up about 7 more here and a few more here, and then you have a big landing upstairs. Notice that this paneling isn't painted. It's pine, but it has been faux painted, or what's the word for that? No, it has been daubed with paint to try to mimic a more expensive wood like oak or maple, even though it's made of pine. So once again, mirroring the rising fortunes of the family. 1755, built by the Barnard family. It's been in the Barnard family for 10 generations. The original farm encompassed more than 350 acres. 350 of them were tillable. And notice that in this instance, the door has the windows on the side and not over the top. It's a center hall. The stairs run straight from the foyer up, and there's a chimney to the left of the stairs. In all likelihood, there had been a chimney to the right of the stairs. These were later eliminated and combined when central heating came in. And all of these houses, of course, had to adapt and figure out what they were going to do about things like heating, plumbing, electricity. And so a look inside, you can see that this fireplace is by no means original. It's very much Victorian, and it's been covered up because the flue is used. Here's that doorway with a straight run staircase. This part of the paneling is carved wood. On the opposite side, it's plaster. And as you rise to the top of the stairs, it's a curved wall. It's very gracious. And it gives access to all the rooms upstairs. In the attic of this house, we see something that was very common in the early 1700s that fell out of favor. Notice that these two rafters that meet at the ridge don't meet on a ridge pole. There's no pole holding up the very top or peak of the roof. It's these rafters that hold up the roof, and the rafters are supported by a horizontal beam. It's an easier construction. The weight of the rafters is supported by this horizontal beam. Notice this inverted Roman numeral 6. Here it is, the Roman numeral 6, indicating that these were planned, cut on the ground and shaped on the ground and then put into place up in the attic. This thing here that looks like an extended peg is called a trunnel, and that's a vernacular pronunciation of tree nail. This actually runs all the way through this beam and out the other side. This beam would have had a tenon, a portion that went into the mortise, a hole in this beam, fit together, and this trunnel holds the whole piece in place, no metal needed. 1755, the Hiram Adams house. This is at the base of Tariffville Road, where tolls were collected for people who were coming from Simsbury or going to Simsbury. Again, symmetrical, 5 windows, but look at the roof pitch here, much shallower than what we've seen in other cases. There would have been much less headroom in the attic than in most of the other examples. And again, here's an addition that you would expect to see in order to make this a livable house. In the more modern age, same with the 2 windows here that are twinned, that would not have been likely done in the original time frame. This talk about a big farm, went from Tariffville Road and its property extended all the way to the Farmington River. It's an astonishing piece of land. Now here we are leaving the 14 oldest houses. We're almost done. And a little farther up on Tariffville Road, up near the top of the ridge with a view that extends 30 or 40 miles across the Connecticut River, is the Eliphalet Mitchell House, 1774. This grew rather exponentially. It's utterly elegant house. Here's the main house here. Again, notice the windows on the side of the door, but you have a full extension here. And here you have an L that was not original, was added later. We know that because this chimney has a beehive baking oven that would have been in the original kitchen in the house. But in the L, we also have a beehive baking oven, which would have removed kitchen duties from the main building into the L. Very common transition. And the porch expands the living space with a gorgeous view out over the river. Out over the Farmington River. Ron Marchetti. Out over the Connecticut River to the east. In 1780, Robert Sanford built this house. It's on Maple Avenue. Grand Georgian proportions. It's very tall. It has a doorway with a Greek Revival classical portico. Notice these ornamental Carvings under the eaves. These are known as dentils, like little teeth. The rooms are expansive. Notice it also has the coffin door. The pitch on the roof is very high. It gives you a full height attic. And we know from genealogy research and tax records that Janice Langston has done that the Sanfords were a wealthy business family in Hartford. And there's course to and from Barbados, indicating that there was involvement with the triangle trade. This originally was an estate of 160 acres or more. We should significant paneling and decoration on the inside. Absolutely beautiful house. And Ruth Ann reminds me, in addition to the winding staircase and the foyer, there's also a staircase on the opposite gable that leads to the back bedrooms upstairs. So privacy was provided for in a house like this. 1787, the Reverend Ambrose Todd. This is one of the very few houses of this configuration in Windsor. It has it. Did I say Windsor? I said Windsor. In Bloomfield. It was used as the parsonage for the St. Andrew's Church. Which is located a couple of tenths of a mile north of this building. Very Georgian symmetry and sensibilities. There has been one opinion by an architectural historian who says, this doorway and these window surrounds are retrofitted to look older and plainer than they should on a house of this size and elegance. And as an example, we'll go back, and if we have more detail, you could see that these windows are much more detailed and carved in their decorative surrounding than these flat surface windows that you see in the image. We do not have any evidence to say yes or no, but that was just an opinion. And then finally, I want to show you the David Grant house. This is one that started life in 1723, back here. This current version of the house was a replacement for the 1723 house that was done in 19. But why it's particularly significant is that when the 1723 house was replaced, they saved and preserved an awful lot of the interior paneling from that house and reinstalled it in the new house. And so we'll see a picture of that in a minute. This house is the only example that I'm showing that has the entrance to the house on the side. This is the door, and then there's a floor to ceiling window here, and the chimney is integral into the wall. This allows for a straight run staircase and a straight hallway that accesses all the rooms. The house itself is built of trap rock, which itself is an amazing uniqueness. There are only 8 or 9 of them in our area. Unusual also is the gable end facing the road with a half circle arch in the window, much more elegant than anything else we've seen. Notice the redstone or brownstone rather arch there, and then notice here a stone in the shape of a heart, because this, we believe, signifies that David Grant had provided this house addition to his son and his new bride. And it's done in the Greek Revival style, very high. Yes, it looks very much like a temple, very high design, as you can see. This paneling is from 1723. It's vertical wood sheathing. It's not plaster at all. It's just very wide trees milled and applied to the studs. Would have been much easier to install than plastering, for example. Over here on this side, the door is back here, and there's the straight run staircase that goes up, and a hallway that leads all the way to a back room. On both, on the right-hand side, there's a door to the living room, a door to the dining room, both of which can be closed off for privacy. There's privacy again. It becomes more and more of a premium as families move away from a strict agrarian lifestyle. David Grant had more money and a different way of making money. He was a legislator, an educator, and so on. The living room and dining room are connected by pocket doors, so they can even be closed off from each other. So privacy, once again, rears its head as a priority. This elegance is stuff they're not doing anymore. This is plaster molding, plaster, and this is wood carving in the hall. Absolutely beautiful. It's stunning. And this is curved, as it appears to be, in order to present a closet in each space, in the hall and in the living room behind it. A real novelty for the time. And yet another novelty is what looks like a fireplace that has had a wood stove plugged into it. But we know that David Grant was very avant. He was up with the latest technology. Fireplaces are not efficient. Wood stoves are much more efficient. And none of these fireplace openings in this house were intended for open fires. They were all intended for cast iron wood stoves. This is an upgraded stove, but we know from Don Baker, who lives there, and Janet, that when they rebuilt the flue in these various openings, they expected to find fireplaces, but sure enough, there were no fireboxes. They were flues for wood stoves. So once again, to recap, we are blessed with just an abundance of antique homes. There are at least as many homes in the that were built in the 1700s that I haven't shown as there were that I have, maybe more. I estimate there are 46 1700s houses in present day Bloomfield that we know of, and virtually every one of them is in very good condition. Tremendous attestation to the robustness of the construction, the appropriateness of the building to its purpose, and their ability to be adapted with the times in terms of technology and style to remain functional and very pleasant living spaces today.